Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today as we are talking about the Andre the Giant documentary that went down on HBO. I almost talked about the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, but this, of course, is coming off the end of WrestleMania weekend. This debuted on HBO on Tuesday night. I was not able to sit down and watch it live, and I was anxiously waiting to watch this. This is available on HBO Go or HBO On Demand. I'm sure that if you just have regular HBO, it's going to show again. I'm sure that the internet pirates have found some way to put this up on the internet. I'm sure that if you scour through YouTube or something like that, you'll be able to find this if you are trying hard enough to find it. If not, just go to HBO. That's the easiest way to get it. You'll have to subscribe to it. But I made a video about this when it was first put out. That HBO was getting into the sports documentaries game, of course, with Bill Simmons coming on board. They had sort of got forced out by the whole ESPN 3430 boom. And one of the first ones they wanted to make was a documentary on Andre the Giant, something that Bill Simmons had, publicly been saying for a while. This was, a project that he had been wanting to work on. Right now, I guess you can sort of base the Andre the Giant documentary against the Ric Flair documentary that came out from 30 from 30 a few months ago. I honestly wanted to judge which one was better. I honestly think that this is two different stories, and it's hard to put them against each other. The only thing that really have to go the same is the wrestling background with Andre and Flair. I had a lot of questions about Andre the Giant as a wrestler. I was somebody who became a wrestling fan in the late 80s. Watching, WWF, and watching a lot of shows, watching the pay-per-views, collecting VHS tapes. But I can honestly say that I didn't really become a real wrestling fan until the 90s. And by that time, Andre the Giant was already gone. And there's not really a lot before the network came out to really look back on. Andre the Giant had a documentary DVD that came out from WWF Video around the 2000s, I believe. It was a very, very early one. I think he was just ripped right off of an old Andre the Giant VHS. I've tried to watch it once or twice. It's honestly pretty boring, and I never really, could finish it. It's just the honest truth. The style of matches that they put on there were not, up to par with the wrestling that I like watching today, and the stuff put me to sleep a lot. Like, if I was to try to sit down and watch probably some Nick Bockwinkel matches or some Bob Backlund matches, it's just not the style of wrestling that I watch today. So I don't know a lot about Andre the Giant. I thought that they went out of their way to conquer the stories that everybody knows about Andre. They talked about, him, getting along with all the women, and just sort of answering the question why he was such a chick magnet back in the day. And the way Ric Flair put it, talking about his size 24 shoe or his size, I think he said his size 24 ring finger, and you just putting it on that about just that's what brought the women to him. Is I guess they just wanted to see how big it was, if you know what I'm getting at. But they talked all about him drinking. Ric Flair saying that he personally watched him drink over 100 beers in one sitting. We had people from him being in the wrestling business with. We had people from him being in movies, from all different points of his career, talking about the various amounts of liquor that he used to drink, whether if it was starting off with a case of wine, adding in, a case of beer, and then polishing off a few bottles of actual liquor to go along with it, and then not actually getting him to the point where he's able to admit that he's drunk, just that he's feeling a little bit tipsy. Obviously, those are the stories that most people talk about when they talk about Andre the Giant. I wanted to know a lot about him in wrestling, and they talked about him, breaking into the business, wrestling in France at 19 years old, Obviously, he was tall, and he had a very, very slender build, and nothing really like the Andre the Giant that you know today. But his disease that made him into a giant. I honestly don't remember the name of it. Basically, it hadn't really 100% kicked in yet, so he hadn't really became the giant. I believe they said that he was at that time at 19 years old. He was at 6'9" or maybe at 6'10", so he hadn't reached over 7 feet tall yet. And he broke into the business in France before moving to Montreal. And Montreal is where he would start being booked as John Ferret. And he would sort of be booked around the United States as well as Canada. One of the ways that he became Andre the Giant is that he was booked to have a match in Chicago, and the way the person on the phone who was trying to get Andre the Giant booked, kept asking what's his name, and the way that they were hearing the Canadian accent, it was John Ferry. And he's like, how am I supposed to get a guy named John Ferry over? Asking what his real name was. His real name is Andre Rouzmov, I believe, or somewhere close to that. And just said, I will call him Andre the Giant. And then from there it took on, the eighth wonder of the world. And it sort of took off. He had the backstory that he was found being a lumberjack, cutting down trees in the forest, and they just sort of brought him into the world of wrestling. And you have to have some sort of a backstory of where you find this guy, and that is where it rolled from there. Moving into the business, he just sort of moved around. This, of course, was back in the territory days where you had, the Crockett's working in North Carolina. You had Jerry Lawler working in Memphis. You had the AWA up in Minnesota. You had Mid-South working around, Oklahoma. You had I just went blank on the Von Erichs down there in Texas. And you had Vince Sr. Having the WWF running the New York territory, which ran up from, it had Philadelphia as well as Maine, New York. I think it might have had Baltimore, but I'm not 100% sure if it did or not. But it definitely had Boston in there. So that whole northern thing, it definitely was one of the larger territories that was out there. And that's sort of what led to the expansion that would come. I think that honestly, this documentary, more than anything else, it conquered finding out who the man, Andre the Giant, was, telling you about his backstory, about once he started making money, and being a wrestler here in the United States, making up home in North Carolina, a small town where basically he wasn't looked at as a freak, or wasn't hassled by the locals for pictures and autographs. They just sort of looked at him as if he was a normal guy. He could go to a diner and get something to eat. He can go to a fast food place and get fast food. He could go to the corner convenience store and buy beer. He could go to the grocery store. He could get a haircut. Anything that he could do. And it reminded him a lot of his small town that he came from in France. And, from there he would sort of build a group of people that he trusted that become his family. I had always thought that, honestly, Andre the Giant lived in France where he had a castle. I don't know if that is a story that I picked up from wrestling, or if that is just something that I heard and it's just 100% not true. But to find out that this guy actually was living in the woods in Carolina is pretty cool. It's one of the things that I wanted to learn from him. In this documentary, they talked about who he was as a man. They talked about, they talk about the biggest match that he was ever in, and that definitely was WrestleMania 3. In order to build up WrestleMania 3, you get a backstory on the territories, as well as you get a mini documentary on who Hulk Hogan is as well. Hulk was one of the biggest talking heads of this documentary. You got the man with no name, basically from the old school editions of Cheap Heat. David Shoemaker, he was one of the real historians who kept things 100% factual. You've got Dave Meltzer was in there, Shane McMahon, Vince McMahon, all telling the story. I really like the way Stephanie always gets emotional when talking about Andre. So it was kind of weird not seeing her involved in there. She was one of the people who was always posting pictures about Andre. Of course, one of the first pictures you ever see is her wearing the Andre the Giant t-shirt in the old WWF merchandise catalog. So always really cool to see pictures with her and Andre and things like that at a young age. But from this, they build up Hulk Hogan. Hogan tells the story of WrestleMania 3. Andre, who was diminishing in health, was already thinking of leaving wrestling behind, had sort of told Vince that he was done. Vince thought that he could do Hogan versus Andre in the Pontiac Silverdome and sell the whole building out, of course, where they would sell 93,000 tickets and fill it to the rafters. Being one of the biggest things that WWF ever did until WrestleMania 32, where they got 101,000 people in Texas to see WrestleMania 32, where it'd be Triple H versus Roman Reigns in the main event. But Hogan versus Andre was a match that nobody really knew what was going to happen. Hogan knew that he was a big star, but knew that basically anything that Andre wanted to do in that ring is what Andre was wanting to do. Hogan says that he's the one who planned out the entire match on a yellow legal pad, where he wrote down the whole idea of them getting in the argument in the middle of the ring, and then from there, him trying to slam Andre, where Andre would fall on top of him, and then when they would sort of have the affair of Andre beating up on him for a while before Hogan would get his comeback, and then he left the rest of it blank, and then that was sort of for Andre to fill in because nobody knew what the finish was going to be, and Andre, as well as Vince, Tim White, all joked around with Hogan, basically saying that whatever Andre wanted to do is what Andre was going to do, but Andre knew what was best for business, that, if he wanted to, he could have became WWF champion that day, but what was he going to do with the title from then on because of his diminishing health? Of course, he would let Hogan slam him, he would get the pin, and Hogan would continue on being the champion. But then they just go into this downfall of Andre the Giant, which basically within minutes, Andre has had a heart attack and he's died. They don't really talk about him leaving the WWF. That's what they wanted to talk about. They didn't talk about him going and working that WCW show. They didn't talk about him working in Japan days before his death in the tag match, which is available on YouTube where you can go find it. So there were holes in this documentary, but honestly, in my mind, there was less holes in the Andre doc than there was in that Ric Flair 30 for 30 that we had a few months ago. So I learned a lot. I definitely can say that I still don't know a lot about Andre, and I don't think I'm going to get that until I go back and watch a lot of his old school matches. But with the network, it's so hard to get stuck in the groove of watching a certain thing, and as of right now, I'm just not stuck on watching that time period. So I can say that I enjoyed the Andre the Giant, HBO documentary. I don't think that WWE has any rights to this other than, Vince McMahon getting the sort of final cut about what went down in the documentary. So I don't see this being spun into some sort of Andre the Giant, 3-disc set, but maybe they'll just come out with a 3-disc set of Andre the Giant and just see what happens with just 3 discs of just straight up matches that we've never seen before, or maybe you have seen and you want to enjoy again. So we'll see what the future brings for Andre the Giant. He's always going to be one of the biggest WWF legends of all time. I think he was the first Hall of Famer that went in at the first King of the Ring pay-per-view. So congratulations. I thought this was really well done, and if you haven't seen it, go out of your way because it's 10 times better than this review was.